Uh, Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Carevolution's webinar on EMR data for research. I'm Benjamin Berk, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Brandon Savage. We are both clinical informaticists here at Carevolution. I'm an MD by training and have led primary care, population health, and hospice providers and startups. And I've now come back full circle to the IT side of healthcare. And I've been at Carevolution for about 6 years. Working both with our data transformation and our research platforms. So today we're excited to share with you how regulatory and technical progress is paving the way for platforms to enable transformation of research workflows. We'll be diving into how every researcher can have access to real-world data without having to do a BAA with everyone. As well, how this data can be incorporated into your study workflows while enhancing participant engagement, and how a broad set of data, just as it is in Epic and Cerner and other EMRs, can be available for analysis, including in OMOP. So the core question we really want to leave you with today is the core message is that EMR data is now easier to access, it's easier to use and view, and to analyze than ever before. So we're going to show you how that works in practice. Next slide. So recent advances in the regulatory landscape and on the technical side with maturation of standards like FHIR have really enabled a much broader set of data than was ever previously available. And just in the past few years, as the regulations from the Cures Act have come into place, and in particular, the patient-mediated exchange requirements and the information blocking requirements, and the bar set by the US CDI, which is a set of standards defining kind of what data has to be made available for patients. There's a much broader set of data that not only patients can access, but then patients and participants in studies can make available for research. Next slide. So today we will be focusing on, oh, I'm sorry, you can go back one slide. Today we'll be focusing on the end-to-end workflow. So how we connect to EMRs to support the study workflows, how we can use that data within a workflow for things like segmenting our cohort and automating different triggers, whether that be surveys or other actions within our study, how we can use the data to feed back to participants to really enhance engagement, and how that data can then be incorporated with and integrated with survey data, device data, any other study data in order to support research in a variety of analytical platforms. Next slide. So we're going to dive first straight into a demo. I'm going to hand this to Brandon to introduce himself and dive right in from the participant's perspective.
Hello, welcome. I'm Brandon Savage. I'm an internal medicine physician by training, and I work in both product development and implementation and have worked on many different clinical trials, those with EHR data, those without, those with devices. And today I'm going to share with you the participant experience in terms of sharing EHR data. Before I jump in, though, I just want to highlight that everything I'm showing right now, a site can configure themselves. And of course, we're happy to help. But the key is that when you're working on these projects, potentially, all of these capabilities are off the shelf, they're self-serve. We're here to support you, but this doesn't require complicated configuration. The screens you're going to see are operating on a Apple device. It also works on Android, or participants can even use this on the web. And as I go through as a participant, one of the things that I want you to appreciate is that I, as a participant, am in complete control. There's no mysterious things happening in the background. I'm in charge of sharing my data. I can see what data that I'm sharing. So now I'm going to jump into the experience, orient you a little bit to what you're seeing. Here's a study that we created, the longitudinal heart study. At the very top is something that's quite important for participants. It's kind of giving some context. So as a participant, I know, oh, I'm in phase one, and my next call to action is to confirm my eligibility. And these badges or stars make it easier for me to know where I am in this phase. And we've also found working with sites that these stars or badges or things like this or incentives help keep participants oriented and motivated. You can see I have a little additional information in terms of what is required for screening. And then now I know at the bottom, as a participant, I need to connect a provider or payer so that I can confirm my eligibility for this study. I need to find a diagnosis of atherosclerosis. Now, the key here from a study perspective is all of this is happening on the participant side. So I could share this study with a QR code, with a social media campaign, and I could even ask some upfront clarifying or confirming questions before the participant gets to this site. And before a coordinator even needs to engage with a patient, I am able to confirm based upon connecting to a data source that the patient is eligible for the study with a given diagnosis. So now, as a participant, I am going to connect a provider or payer just by tapping on that section. And this is going to take advantage of the Cures Act Patient Access API. There's a little bit of an intro here with the survey that says what I'm going to be doing. There is a screening consent. So if they're going to share some information, you can have a very tailored consent just for the information necessary for screening, even if they haven't fully decided to join the study. Then I'm going to connect to in this case, CMS. This is actually taking advantage of the Blue Button API. I'm connecting now. I'm going to put in this is a sandbox password from CMS. It's asking me to confirm that I want to share my claims. It's now connecting to CMS and getting access to my claims. One key advantage of using claims at this stage is that claims tends to have the most breadth. So it's more likely that if I had a diagnosis done, let's say the cardiologist is the one who made that diagnosis, and rather than just connecting to my PCP's EMR upfront, this is the broadest source of data. I've now connected. The system has already confirmed the diagnosis of atherosclerosis. So now I can choose to join the study. You can see that the phase one progress has advanced. I can see now my next step is to complete the consent. And there's a little bit of a kind of a celebration to say that I'm eligible. So at this point, I have already been pre-screened. So as a participant, as I'm going in here and I'm consenting to join, I'm really clear that I am an appropriate member for this study before the team actually has to reach out. So now I go through and now I'm completing the consent for the study. I can see that I'm confirmed to be eligible. I can review the consent. That consent even can be emailed off as a confirmation. Once I've consented and signed, and we do support, confirming signatures or typing the name, various additional levels of consent confirmation. I get the final step here that says thank you, and I know that I'm going to be receiving some baseline surveys. And now I can see up top that I'm ready to connect my primary care EMR, and I can see there's already some surveys waiting for me. One thing to highlight here is that the system knows that a payer has connected to my record, but I don't have an EMR. And it is important for many studies, in addition to potentially claims data, to get things like labs and other information that would not be present in claims. And so the system knows to also act for a connection to the EMR. So I can see very clearly that's my next step. I'm going to click on this call to action. And now I'm going to connect to an EMR. I'm actually going to connect to two, but I'm going to start by connecting to Epic. And this is the Epic sandbox, but it is very similar to what an Epic screen might look like. And so I'm going to connect to their sandbox. I'm going to use a password. Now, this is important because these screens are going to be similar to what a participant would experience connecting to my chart. If there is more than one person on the account, they'll select themselves. There is information from Epic about Care Evolution. I continue. I have, as a participant, this is highlighting in control. I can choose what I share with the study. Everything defaults is checked off. And you can see it's a very broad set of information. I can choose how long I share that information. Generally, we recommend that you encourage participants to share it for a longer period of time so they don't need to reconnect. But we do, and Benjamin will talk about later, have mechanisms to identify if the access has expired, and we can notify them to connect again at specific study milestones. So now I'm going to allow access as the participant, and this data will then be shared with the patient's record and then the participant. And then the participant has chosen to share this with the study. So it thanks me for connecting my EHR. I now have got access. I have now made the final step in the initial progress, and now it's just waiting for me to connect to my baseline surveys. To show you a little bit more of the workflow, I'm going to connect one more source. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to connect one more provider. In this case, I'm going to connect just the Care Evolution sandbox, just so that I can pull in some appropriate lab data on my participant. And now I have data from CMS, from Epic, and data from Care Evolution. And this, now I clicked on the My Data tab, and this is showing our health and wellness dashboard, which is very important from a patient engagement point of view. They can see the data that they're sharing. You could see it was loading the data in real time from the various sources up top. And now I have kind of a patient or a participant optimized view to see the data. I can see my lab results. So, in a study on atherosclerosis, LDL is particularly important. So as a participant, I can even go through and search and take a look at my history. I can see my medications. Immunizations are interesting. Even if I have immunizations from more than one source, you can see here I have some from Epic, some from Care Evolution. I have access to my notes. So you can see the various notes, and these can be quite detailed, CCDAs if you're familiar. So you can see information from various visits. And I can also see the conditions. One of the things interesting here with conditions is often I might have diagnoses from many, many sites. I only see these diagnoses once, so it's an easy list from a participant point of view to look at. And you can see the atherosclerosis that qualified me for the study there. So I go back to my home screen, and you can see that the system identified that there was a new LDL coming in from, in this case, from Care Evolution. And so the screen changes. It says, hey, I want you to follow up on that LDL cholesterol. It shows me the recent labs, so it provides a little bit of context. And as a study, this is an important thing to notice because if there is a piece of information that you're interested in, like an elevated LDL, and you want to get some feedback from a participant, you can use that as a trigger for a survey, as we're doing here. So now as a participant, this is just a real simple survey. It asks, hey, you have an elevated LDL. It displays the value on the screen and is just asking, in this case, if you had followed up with your primary care doctor. Obviously, whatever survey makes sense, you could pull in here. I click yes. And now that last call to action has completed. And all that's left for me to finish phase one at this point is for me to finish my baseline surveys. So that's the participant experience, and you can see here that as a participant, I was fully in control. There is nothing here that is, magic or special that I configured for the demo. This is the same experience that any organization wanting to connect to an EHR can create and optimize for their use case. So in summary, the EMR can drive, I'll pass off to you now, Benjamin,
Yep.
for the second half of the demo.
Yeah, so now that we've seen the participant perspective, we're going to shift to look at what a study coordinator is seeing. And so while I'm getting this screen up, I'll also mention that feel free to drop questions into the Q&A or into the chat, and we will definitely be leaving time for Q&A at the end. So what you can see now on the screen is I'm logged into My Data Helps Designer. And this is the place where coordinators would come to view the progress of the study and to engage with various aspects of the study workflow. And it's also the place where the study is initially configured and designed. And so I'll show you both of those pieces. So the first thing that we're seeing here is our participant dashboard. And we can see as well that we've got segmentation. So if I click here on this elevated LDL segment, I can see the one participant that is in this segment. And this is the high LDL greater than 150 that Brandon demonstrated as being pulled in from the EMR data. We can take a look here into how this segment is actually created. So if I click on the segment editing, I can see that there's a custom field here that's been populated behind the scenes from the EMR data. I can also see that there's another segment here called EHR needs reconnection. And Brandon mentioned, and you saw when he connected to Epic, that it actually asked for a specific time frame that that EMR connection should be made available. At the end of that time frame, the token, the kind of authorization for that connection will expire. And so we want to be able to configure in the platform a way to recognize when those connections expire and to prompt participants to reconnect. And so if I click into this segment, we can see here that we've got logic that says if there's a linked account for a provider where the status is needs reconnect, that is going to bring a participant into this segment. And we can also see that I could have chosen, health plan or device. So there's other types of connections that we can maintain and leverage within the platform as well. So what we might want to do then with participants that have entered this needs reconnection segment is send a notification. And so if I click over here into our notifications panel, we can see that we have configured a notification called EMR needs reconnect. And if I click into that, we can see simply a push notification being configured with the text, thanks for connecting your EMR. Connection's only good for a limited amount of time. It's now expired. So please reconnect by clicking on the connect provider in the app. And so a notification like this can be configured to be sent to participants based on certain triggers. And so if I go here into schedules and I scroll down, I see I've got a schedule here called reconnect. And if I bring that up, I can see some very basic logic. If the participant is in that segment that we already configured elsewhere, then we're going to take some actions. And in this case, we will push that EMR needs reconnect notification to those participants. And we will update a custom field that indicates that's attached to each participant where this is true and marks that so we can use that in logic elsewhere, which we'll get to in a minute. These notifications can be sent via push within the app, but they can also be sent via SMS or email. And sometimes we would create multiple notifications, perhaps even with an escalation. So maybe we send a push first, And then if that's not responded to within a certain period of time, we'll send an SMS or an email as follow-up only to the subset that haven't responded. In that way, we're following the best practice of really trying to minimize notifications so that our participants don't get fatigue from receiving these. So the next thing that would like to show here is how the screens that Brandon showed you in the application are actually configured and how they can leverage the logic that we have just shown you in terms of segments. So here we can see a number of the app screens. And as I scroll through each of these, we can see that these are kind of what's available from the participant's view. And if I click here into edit, I can go right into what we call View Builder. I'm gonna make this a little smaller, just so we can see it. And so what you can see here is actually the full screen and including all of the logic that goes into determining what is shown, what is hidden, and how things show up in the screen. And if I start a new one here, we can see that we can actually start blank, or we can start from a whole number of templates. So let's click first into the health and wellness dashboard. And we can see that this is one of our templates in here, which has these blocks showing lab results, medications, other types of EMR data, as well as a block here at the bottom that is the prompt to connect a provider. And this is simply a drag and drop. What you see is what you get design or application. And so I can simply, let's say, add some text to the top of this screen here. And let's say that I want the text here to be prompting a participant to reconnect. So I might click in here and replace this with something around, the connection's only good for a certain amount of time. But I'm going to want to show this only when a participant needs reconnection. And so I can see here, there's a conditional block, which I can easily pull in, and I can push this text into that conditional block, which says show if, and I'm just going to paste in an expression here, but there's a variety of ways to do this, but you can see now I'm referencing that custom field I mentioned earlier, right? EHR needs reconnect. So very quickly, I can create some basic logic that is going to manipulate the participant experience. A lot of these things can be pre-configured. We've got many templates in the platform and a lot of best practices in our user guides. But we also have all of the basic building blocks as well as more kind of advanced types of displays and conditionals that can be brought into a view. And so if I go back here to this overall view, you can see that the way that Brandon was showing those different phases of progress is simply configured by some custom fields here. And if I scroll all the way down, we can see this is that health and wellness that was shown up front. So showing how easy it is to both pull in that clinical data to a participant view, which can be incredibly helpful with participant engagement and also making participants understand that this is their data, but also incorporate that prompting for connection or for reconnection. And so with that, I am going to now shift back to our webinar. Let me just advance these slides, and I'm going to hand it back to Brandon to give us a bit of a perspective on where this can fit within trial workflows.
Thank you, Benjamin. So this is, kind of an overall summary of what we just went through. And from an EMR perspective, there are two ways to think about how we're improving the experience. it's pretty obvious that from a data side, whether the data analysis, you're obviously going to get benefits from the EHR, but even up front from the trial management side, it can have a big impact. So from the trial management side, we talked about and I showed participant screening. So one of the processes up front in terms of screening and recruiting that can put a lot of energy in is or requirement is the ability to get the participants that you're looking for. So being able to pre-screen, like screening for patients who are immunocompromised but don't have cancer before a participant even needs to connect with a coordinator, can be very impactful on the trial management. There's a lot of ways that you can inform and kind of do precision clinical trials by having the trial, whether it be surveys or what's displayed the participant, reflect what has changed in the participant's clinical environment. So you could send a survey out based on a new influenza vaccine, or maybe recommend that a participant is in a new cohort. So it allows you to more precisely engage with the participant based upon what's going on. It also improves the participant experience as well. So when they're connecting data across all of these sources, they don't have to get on a call with a coordinator to answer a survey. They can do that on their own time. They also have the ability to see on that health and wellness dashboard all of the information aggregated across all of those sources, and those can be tied to the incentives, which encourage somebody to share their data and participate as an ongoing basis in that trial,
It,
keeping them engaged.
if I might, Brandon, just want to go back to the demo screen for one moment because I neglected to show in the coordinator view, what Brandon is talking about now is if I'm looking at an individual participant, here's where I can also see what segments they're a member of, and we can see that the participant we were looking at is connected to their EHR. We saw that they had an elevated LDL. We can see what accounts they have linked here. We can also see what the clinical data, just as a participant is seeing it. We can see what tasks they have complete or incomplete and the results of the surveys. So that survey that Brandon completed that was prompted by a high LDL, asking if they had followed up with their primary care provider. We can see that came through here with a yes. For participants that have connected Apple Health or Google Fit, we can actually see that data in here as well. And finally, detailed participant information, demographics, including those custom fields, right? So we mentioned earlier that there's a set of custom fields here that can be populated through various logic within workflows and then incorporated to determine what is shown to participants or what might be triggered to be sent to participants. Brandon, I'll switch back to this flow so you can kind of give an overview of the data analysis side, and then I'll show the export Explorer piece.
Sure. And then from the data analysis side, there's obviously a whole pipeline of how data it flows in order to facilitate analysis. And so the data collection, and when Benjamin shows the analysis here in a moment, we're pulling data in from multiple sources. So a very common scenario is that a patient may have a PCP, and then they may have a specialist. And so especially for something like a coronary artery disease trial, making it very easy for a participant to bring both the PCP and specialist in, even if they're different organizations. And even pulling in claims information that gives you that broad landscape of all of the data and sources that might have been available. One thing that happens automatically, but ends up significantly improving the analysis experience, is the standardization of all of the data. So when the data comes in, and let's say there is a hemoglobin A1C from 5 different sources, all of those hemoglobin A1Cs are standardized to a consistent code, so that if you're analyzing, you want to find, all of the hemoglobin A1Cs, there's no special work that you need to do in order to compare and look at trends all across the organization. And then finally, another advantage around EHR data that's very different than chart extraction is when you connect to a source, you may get 10 years worth of data. And so it is a very comprehensive medical history. Because it's standardized, it's very easy to focus on what you're interested in. But at the same time, if there is something that you want to look at for a long-term trend, and when you're looking at your data, that data is there as well, so that you can start doing more detailed analysis or even ask questions that might help you design your next trial.
Excellent. So within the My Data Helps Designer application, we can see here this section for Analyze. And in here, there are a number of reports that kind of come out of the box populated. So things that can, for example, look at enrollment over time, that can look at notifications that have been sent out, completions of surveys, and tasks. But we can also configure in here exports. And these can come as the FHIR exports that have come directly from EMRs, but they can also be configured to be converted to OMOP. And we'll talk in a minute about the differences between FHIR and OMOP and which you might want. The data, once exported, can be accessed directly within the designer application. We've got this tool called Export Explorer, which enables access to the data in SQL and SQL for those that are familiar with that. So for example, we can do a simple query to look at the list of participants. We've got some saved queries in here. So we might, for example, look at all of the conditions that are in the EMR data. So this is the data that Brandon just showed being connected, being pulled in My Data Helps via FHIR, and now is available in a tabular form for export. We can do things like look at a list of survey questions, et cetera. And so that shows that we can be joining. We can be looking at both the EMR data coming in as well as the survey data or device data, any of the data types within the same space, which makes it very convenient for analysts. For those that aren't familiar with SQL, we also have a query copilot, which enables us to ask questions in natural language, and that gives this query copilot understands the data structure, can generate SQL for you. It'll show you the assumptions that are being made in its thought process so that you can double check and make sure that the way that it is querying the data is consistent with your expectations. And it will populate that SQL directly into the query editor here so that you can see the SQL, you can edit it yourself if you need to, and then you can run it. So we can see here, for example, it made a query to look at how many participants have connected their EMR. This is something that maybe I'm not familiar with the data model or I'm not familiar with SQL, but I want to be able to ask this question that's not yet in a pre-populated report. And so it'll populate the SQL here, and I can ask how many are connected. So I'm going to hand this back over to Brandon now, and we will continue from here.
Move to the next slide. There we go. So now shifting gears a little bit and talking about what's available and some examples from live studies. This key here is that most of the information that you're going to want in order to analyze a study about a participant is available today. It's driven by this US CDI v1. And so everything from notes, demographics, medications, labs, conditions, all of that information is already there. And it is required as part of the promoting interoperability patient access requirement. So as a result, most organizations are providing that data. And it is in a form which is consumable and calculatable. It is fairly standardized. And then in 2026, one thing I'll note is that this is advancing to US CDI v3. and that will add encounters from all sources. So by 2026, and so for studies that are running today with your last pull, you would have access to an incredibly comprehensive medical record and that you are able to then analyze. Next.
So one of the most important questions that we get from researchers is what can I actually expect to get from out of this EMR data today? And as Brandon just highlighted, the answer really is a huge amount. So you could really think of it as a great deal of what is already in Epic and other EMRs. The low bar for this is set by legislation. So the 2016 Cures Act with the information blocking rule and the patient access API. And then building on that, are the regulations and the technical standards. So evolving from US CDI V1 and onward. So this is really the low bar. But on top of that, there is some variation in what is additionally available. So for example, different EMR companies may make some different decisions. Epic might export more than the US CDI requirements. What clinicians do at the point of care is really critical, right? Obviously, you can only access the data that has been entered into the system, and this can be incredibly comprehensive. But it also depends on how the systems are used, the templates, the picking from dropdowns, et cetera. And finally, data that makes its way into FHIR and available for research via this mechanism is often gone through a bit of a data cleanup or enhancement stage. And so many times, even if diagnoses are not coded at the point of care, they usually go through a coding step after the clinicians have touched it, but there's some variation there. And so we use a set of services that really make sure that all the data is standardized. So then what happens to the data once we have it in the system? And there's a variety of ways that these pipelines can be designed. We think of FHIR as is the input format, right? It's giving us a very broad set of data from the EMRs. Many providers, many researchers want this in OMOP. And so that is because it is tabular and more applicable for analysis. In our pipelines, we add in some extensions. We think it's really important to be able to track data lineage. So from the EMR to FHIR to OMOP and onward. And we also enhance the data by adding value sets, which allow for easier grouping and cohorts and segmentation. But the key point here is once it's available in OMOP, there's an entire community of tools that are available. We, for example, use a version of Atlas that enables us to get a very quick view of data completeness across our population, and also to create cohorts that we can then leverage with an analysis. But the data can be imported into any BI or any analytics platform, whether it's Python or Power BI or others that you or your team are familiar with. And so a question often comes up is, should I use FHIR? Should I use OMOP? Either or. And the key thing here is it's really not one or the other. It depends on what you're trying to do, and each format has its strengths. So FHIR really is for exchange and interoperability. It is not lossy. It's essentially pulling everything that's available in the EMR so you can get a complete view of the data. You get full demographics, you'll get the original codings that were made at the point of care. And there's really a broad community of programming tools around FHIR. OMOP, on the other hand, is purpose-built for data analysis. So it's very intentionally focused. It's not going to include all of the data that was in the EMR, but rather it's going to be producing a data set that is validated and much more research and analysis ready. So demographics are limited very intentionally so that data can be de-identified. Codings are all standardized to SNOMED and LOINC and RX norm. They're in a tabular format as opposed to the heavily nested FHIR format. So we really think it's important to think about what you're trying to use the data for, and that will determine which is the most appropriate format to use.
So the key here is how much data is actually available And the exciting part is that almost all providers in the country today are sharing their data. So we see today over 90% of the healthcare that's delivered is accessible by those same connections that I showed you in the participant experience. No coordinator burden. We're seeing today with in-care evolution, you know, uh, 500,000 patients already connected with FHIR connections. You know, nearly 2 million providers are sharing their information, and we have many payers sharing information as well based upon all of the requirements, and this is increasing every day. If we move to the next slide, just using some very specific examples from trials. One is the Progress trial. This is a trial that was focused on precision health around diabetes, multi-dimensional trial looking at hemoglobin A1Cs, looking at CGM response during a time period where participants were recording meal data, included microbiome and blood collection. But to complement it and to make that broad, one of the key things that was important is having access to the EMR data. Next slide. Uh, and what you can see here is that not only do we have broad access to EHR data, there is a high degree of compliance with the connection. So in that study, you know, targeting 1,000 participants, 82% of the participants actually connected their EHR. And so they were able to identify their provider. And not only did that many participants connect at least one, if you look over to the right, 70% had one connection. There were 14% with two and 3% with multiple. So not only are patients willing to connect their data, they're also very capable of connecting to multiple sources. We can extend this with a bigger trial. Here you can see that this scales up. So this is a much larger trial, and you can see here, even dealing with over 50,000 participants, we're seeing similar patterns. The total amount of people who consented to connect was 50,000, and here we have, you know, over 15,000 who've connected one source, and we're seeing that connecting multiple sources, you know, are still very large numbers, 4,000 for two, over 1,000 for three, and we're getting multiple different sources of information, whether that's from direct connections or connecting through Apple Health. If we look a little bit deeper for this information, like I mentioned earlier, it's not just you know, one time point. When you get that pull from the EHR, it populates the history. So we have broad data in these clinical trials that extends back many years. And if we continue, also, not only do we do this, we get a large degree of variation. So broad coverage across the country. This is really important for, sorry, if you go back one second. If you could go, if you're doing a hybrid trial, you're not limited to a specific domain, especially if participants are traveling as well. And you can also see that there isn't really a cutoff by age. We're finding that participants, even who are older now, are able to connect with these devices and get data. You're also able to get a wide range of genders, different ethnicities, a wide range of representation of the underrepresented, because in many of rural communities, there are still connections to EHRs that are available. We move to the next slide. And these records, you know, as would be suggested from USCDI, are quite robust. And you can see most of the participants have data in almost all of the domains, 60% including notes. So there is a very broad representation and rich amount of data. We are seeing that organizations are complying with the requirements and standards today. Next. So with that, I think we're ready for Q&A.
So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So we want to open it up for questions. We've covered a lot of ground. from what's available through participant-mediated exchange to how this data can be incorporated into study workflows and to enhance participant engagement, and then how that data can be made available for analysis. So before we dive into your questions, and please, if you got some, put them in the chat. We've got some also already in the Q&A. Let me just reiterate the key takeaway here is that EMR integration is transforming research from a data collection burden as well as into expanding the scope of data that is available for research. The technology exists today. It is being used in production studies, and it really can decrease the burden on participants while also decreasing the burden on researchers and giving you access to longitudinal real-world data that really would be impossible to collect through other methods. So Brandon and I are here to answer any questions you have, whether about technical implementation, regulatory considerations, study design, strategies, or any other questions you have. So we will have Leah ask us some of the questions that have been posted here into the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much for that great overview. One of the questions is data from TRICARE potentially available for those using DoD healthcare?
Yes, it is. So just as we showed the CMS Blue Button effort, there are equivalent Blue Button efforts both in the VA and in DoD. And so that data is available through these same mechanisms. Yes.
Wonderful. Another question we have is, what's the typical timeline from study design to having participants connecting their EMRs?
Brandon, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. We've had studies go live in 30 days. The technical implementation is quite fast, as you could see with that kind of drag and drop. Generally speaking, we move, the people who are configuring the primary holdup is, finishing your protocol and getting IRB taken care of. But the actual connectivity and testing is, in a less than 30-day period, and as is for many trials that we work on.
Another question, if I'm newer to analyzing EHR data for research, where do you recommend I start?
Yeah, so as I hope we've made clear today, getting access to the data and incorporating it into a study can be pretty straightforward. And so I think getting started would be making the decision to incorporate it. This data does not require a BAA. It simply requires the participant to consent. And therefore, you can really get started right away with getting access to data. We think when data is coming into a study, this data access begins as soon as a participant makes that connection. And so you can access the data early in the study to familiarize yourself with the scope of data and the format that's there. And then by the time the study is concluding, you've got more of a feel for the kinds of questions that are going to be answerable through this mechanism. But I'd also say there are some public de-identified data sets available, some of which that can be accessed by researchers with proper access. I'd be happy to follow up with you as well to point you to some of those resources where you might get some sample de-identified data sets, including many from FHIR. So if you look at Cynthia, for example, that is a synthesized data set in FHIR, very broad, and you could access that if you just want to get kind of practice in what this data looks like and what kind of analysis you can do.
One just quick thing to add, unlike chart abstraction, which takes a lot of time before you can even look at the data, we do, weekly or daily export. So once you have one participant in, you can start looking at their data. And so I work frequently with trials where, within the first week of the study going live, I'm talking to the analytics team, and they're already looking at the data and getting all of their pipelines in place. And so rather than having to wait a while before you start looking at it, you're able to start looking at this essentially from day one.
Another one, does your platform currently support any studies for FDA or CDC?
Yes, yes. So we've done numerous studies in public health, both for local health departments and in collaboration with federal authorities. And we have currently and concluded some FDA clinical trials, including phase 4 post-market surveillance trials.
Another one, which is asking, how do you validate the completeness of EMR data pulled through FHIR APIs versus what's actually in the source system?
Yeah, so generally, when you have a data type that is available via FHIR, so conditions, medications, observations, you are going to get via FHIR everything that is available in the EMR. So if you're seeing those in the EMR, they will be in FHIR. Some things aren't coded, right? So there may be things that are in notes, for example, that aren't in the structured data. Right now, some EMR vendors and some providers make notes available, and you can do natural language processing or kind of what's called clinical entity extraction on those notes to get additional data. But what we'd really stress here is the data that is available today via FHIR from electronic medical records is way more comprehensive than anything that has been available before. And so we would really encourage folks to focus on the huge breadth of data that's available, and particularly early on, not worry too much about what might not be there, because what is there, certainly within things like conditions and medications and lab values, is very comprehensive. We would say that leveraging claims data as a denominator can be a good thing. As you saw, you can connect to see participants can connect to CMS. They can connect to payers as required by federal regulation, and that claims data provides a comprehensive view of all of the touch points that they've had with the healthcare system. So if you're concerned about understanding, of the clinical data, whether it's labs or medications or conditions, what subset do I have, or am I missing anything? You can look at claims data to kind of give you that broad view, and then use the EMR data to dive more deeply.
And just one quick thing that I would add, in addition to My Data Helps and then the research side, we also work in interoperability, HIEs, and integration. And so we have a number of opportunities where we're able to look at the source EMR and the HIE data and the data that we're receiving. And so we have been able to directly validate that what Benjamin is saying is true, that rich data in FHIR is indeed comprehensive, and we're very clear on what is coming through, and it has been very comprehensive going all the way to the source.
Great. Another question, how do you differentiate your platform compared to platforms like Datavant, HealthVerity, IQVIA, et cetera?
So a few things, and Brandon, please feel free to chime in. Our platform, first and foremost, has been designed to be participant-centric. So you saw that we have a health and wellness dashboard that provides the participant access to all of their EMR data. The participant is engaged at every point along the way, and that's a key differentiator versus some of the more kind of researcher-focused platforms. I think a second is our platform has been very much designed with a long history of experience in health information exchange. So, many of the other players that are coming from more of a research background, a legacy research background in this space, aren't as familiar with EMR data or claims data. And so we can leverage that experience and have incorporated a lot of that into the My Data Helps platform. Therefore, things like standardization of the data and reconciliation across different EMR providers is really built in. And the third thing that I would mention is that our platform has really been designed to be also very easy to configure by designers and coordinators, so to be self-service and to be highly composable. So for those that are a bit more advanced that want to create their own applications or want to incorporate this functionality into existing studies, all of the components that we highlighted today can actually be accessed via API and be accessed via other mechanisms to kind of embed them within others' applications, not only leveraging our own. Brandon, you want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that our platform is the only platform that really supports a PI who's just starting their career and is wanting to do a trial all the way up through R1 grant, all the way up to a multi-center FDA or CDC related trial. So the ability to grow and scale trials. The technology is there to go any size, but the ease of a small team supporting a trial to a very large team is a real benefit. And that ability to support a small team being able to manage a trial, we found has actually driven a lot of efficiency for the large teams. So a lot of that reduction in coordinator burden, a lot of that engagement of participants, a lot of those things, those improvements have improved the entire spectrum.
We've got time for one more question.
The final question we have is, how do you power studies when you don't know upfront what percentage of participants will successfully connect their EMRs?
It's a great question, and certainly any trial is going to have the challenge, right, of knowing what percentage of participants are going to complete surveys or going to kind of do any of the tasks within a trial. From our experience, we've seen very high rates of connecting to EMRs, particularly because there really is an incentive back to participants. There can be a literal incentive, right? And we've had trials where there are dollar incentives or other rewards that are provided back to participants. But really just accessing and seeing their own data can be very enticing. And when participants access data in that mechanism, it's their data, they own it. They're making it available to the study, but it's available to them more broadly as well. And so even once the study is over or outside the context of the study, participants see that value, and it really enhances connections. In terms of understanding how to power a study, typically researchers that we work with have made some assumptions, right, going in based on experience that we've had with prior trials, and then adjust as we go along. So that sometimes we may need to expand a cohort if those connections are less than expected. But we've seen very high rates and often actually higher rates than we do see for survey completion overall, for example.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is that we think about this not just as a technology, connecting to an EMR, but how do we actively engage a participant so they follow through? And so when we look at trials like Progress and many others, achieving 80% connectivity absolutely is feasible when you upfront design those studies to have the engagement like I demonstrated. So making it very clear what the call to action is, making it very clear what the value proposition is to the participant in terms of them accessing the data and things like badges and so forth. So there are things under your control which are proven to drive up engagement and subsequently proven to drive up the number of connections. And we have, materials on our website that talk about those things in more detail.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your participation and engagement today. We hope we answered a lot of your questions and would be happy to follow up with anyone interested. Thank you so much for your time today. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.